Have you ever wondered what happened to the people who lit street lamps by hand? Or the ones who literally woke up entire towns, before alarm clocks existed? Tonight, you'll fall asleep to the slow unraveling of ancient professions, jobs once essential to daily life, now quietly erased by time. Welcome, and thank you for joining me. Tonight, I'll tell you the story of strange and beautiful professions from long ago. A time when the world moved slower, yet people still worked endlessly, without modern machines or smartphones, to keep cities alive. These were jobs with soot-covered hands, candle-burnt fingers, and leather-worn boots. Jobs passed from parent to child. Jobs with no retirement, just fading into memory. Let's begin in the chilly dawn of a foggy English town, sometime in the early 1800s. The streets are empty, the sky still dark, but one figure moves steadily between the shadows. He is the knocker-upper. His job? To wake the sleeping workers of the city. Before alarm clocks were cheap or reliable, factories depended on men and women like him. Carrying a long wooden stick, sometimes as tall as a lamppost, he'd tap on bedroom windows, one by one, until he saw a light flick on. In smaller towns, knocker-uppers used hollow bamboo tubes to shoot dried peas at windows, quick, sharp hits that would wake someone without needing to yell. It was a strange dance, a quiet ritual: knock, wait, walk, repeat. In working-class neighborhoods, being woken up on time could mean the difference between keeping a job and losing it. These knockers, mostly older men or widows, often memorized dozens of addresses. They worked from 4 a.m. until sunrise. And oddly enough, no one ever woke the knocker-upper. They simply stayed awake through the night. Not far from him, another figure begins her morning. She's not a baker, but she's surrounded by heat. She's the fuller, and she works with wool. Her job is to clean and thicken raw woolen cloth by soaking it in a mix of water, soap, and, strangely, urine. Yes, stale human urine. It was collected from chamber pots and even sold by neighbors in some towns. The ammonia in it helped cleanse the wool. Wearing rolled-up skirts and elbow-deep in buckets, fullers stomped the cloth with bare feet. 4 hours. It was exhausting, smelly work, but it made the wool softer, stronger, and ready for sale. In medieval towns, fulling mills were built near rivers, where wooden hammers would take over the stomping, but before that, it was all done by foot. Some families passed this work down for generations. Their homes smelled faintly of wet wool and ash soap. Yet few people even remember their name today. As the sun rises, we begin to see just how many invisible hands shaped the world before us. And we're only getting started. As morning spills over the rooftops, another forgotten figure begins their work, not with their hands, but with their lungs. The town crier, wrapped in a heavy wool cloak, steps into the center square. He carries no paper, no megaphone, only a brass bell and a booming voice. Long before newspapers were affordable or literacy widespread, he was the living headline. He rings his bell once, twice, and calls out, "Hear ye, hear ye. By order of the mayor, the bridge will be closed at noon." He announces births, deaths, tax changes, missing livestock, and royal decrees. He is the voice of the town. People lean from windows to listen. Children run to follow him. Some even shout questions back. In a world without the internet or even consistent mail, the town crier is both news anchor and public service. But his job isn't easy. He walks miles a day in all weather, sometimes repeating the same message a dozen times. His uniform, often bright and decorated with the town crest, must remain clean, even in the mud. And sometimes, he's the bearer of bad news. Announcing new taxes could lead to shouts, rotten vegetables, or worse. Yet he continues on, committed to his role. Some cried professionally into their 70s. And while he makes noise in the streets, down by the riverside, the toshers begin their day in silence. Their job is to scavenge the city's sewers. With nothing but a long pole, a lantern, and a sack, they wade into the muck beneath Victorian London, searching for lost treasures, coins, scraps of metal, jewelry, anything of value. It's dangerous work. The sewers are damp, dark, and home to rats the size of cats. Poisonous gases hang low. A sudden storm could flood the tunnels without warning. But Toshers know the risks, and the maps. They memorize brick patterns, dead ends, and dry spots. Some families even protect secret entrances passed down through generations. Toshers wear leather patches on their clothes and wrap cloth around their faces. Despite the danger, the job can pay better than factory work. But there's no glory, no recognition, only coins pulled from sludge, and silence. The government eventually made sewer scavenging illegal, but that didn't stop everyone. For the poor, the tunnels offered a grim sort of opportunity. Above ground, life carried on, unaware of the men just feet below, knee-deep in filth, helping to keep the city cleaner, even if by accident. It's strange, isn't it? How entire lives, entire professions, could exist just outside the edge of common memory. And as we continue, you'll meet even more souls from history's quiet corners, some whose hands carved cathedrals, and others whose silence kept secrets buried forever. The streets slowly grow louder, filled with carts, hooves, and the shuffle of shoes. But somewhere, far from the city noise, tucked in the quiet of castle halls and manor kitchens, another long-lost profession begins its daily ritual, the work of the gong farmer. The title may sound strange, almost amusing, but the task was anything but. Gong farmers were the medieval workers responsible for removing human waste from cesspits beneath homes, castles, and public latrines. The word gong comes from the Old English gang, meaning to go, and the gong farmer quite literally went where no one else dared. Armed with a wide shovel, a long-handled bucket, and a cloth soaked in vinegar tied around their nose, they descended into the pits at night. Why night? The smell was unbearable during the day, and fewer people would see them at work. They would dig out weeks or months' worth of compacted waste by lantern light, carrying it up, bucket by bucket, to be loaded into carts and dumped outside the town walls, or sold, oddly enough, as fertilizer. They were paid surprisingly well, more than some craftsmen, but they lived isolated lives. Gong farmers often weren't allowed to live within city walls. The stench clung to them. Their children were teased, their homes built far from marketplaces and churches. Yet their job was vital. Without them, cities would drown in filth. In fact, many historians credit them with helping prevent larger outbreaks of disease in densely packed towns. Even stranger was the occasional discovery of valuables among the waste. Jewelry, coins, rings, all swallowed by accident or dropped through the cracks, were sometimes found in the muck. But by law, the gong farmer had to return anything valuable, unless he could keep the find a secret. As night falls again, and the gong farmer finishes his work, another shadowy profession begins hers, one just as forgotten. She is the sin eater. Found mostly in 17th and 18th century rural England and Wales, the sin eater was called when someone died. Families, especially the poor, would place a piece of bread or pastry on the chest of the deceased. After a quiet prayer, the sin eater would eat the food, believed to absorb the dead person's sins, and drink a bowl of ale or wine over the body. This symbolic act was thought to grant the dead safe passage into the afterlife, cleansed of wrongdoing. But it came with a price. The sin eater was then seen as spiritually polluted. Feared. Shunned. No one would sit near her in church. Children whispered that she carried the weight of dozens of souls. But she continued, part spiritual guide, part pariah, paid in bread, drink, and copper coins. She didn't speak. She didn't argue. She simply ate, bowed her head, and left. And with her, a piece of someone else's life, and death, was carried away. In these quiet, strange corners of history, we see not only what people did to survive, but how entire societies depended on the invisible. And as we go further, even deeper stories emerge. As we drift deeper into history's shadows, past the noise of towns and the smell of open markets, we arrive at the edge of the village, where work begins not with tools, but with silence. Here lives the hermit tax collector, sometimes known as a leper's clerk. In medieval Europe, long before modern accounting, taxes were often gathered in person, sometimes by those considered untouchable. Certain remote communities, burdened by superstition or plague, used lepers or exiled individuals to collect tolls from passing travelers or rent from villagers. These clerks lived alone in small wooden huts, often by bridges or town borders, faces hidden under hoods. They held out long wooden trays or bowls attached to sticks, so people could drop in their coins without getting close. It wasn't always leprosy. Sometimes it was just poverty, or being born with a visible deformity. But once labeled, the role became permanent. They were fed, clothed, and protected, but never embraced. Never spoken to directly. Often, they sang soft chants or repeated prayers while collecting money, their voices the only part of them the town ever heard. And while they waited in solitude, another profession roamed the wild, always moving, always watching. The falconer, a master of birds. These were not hobbyists, but highly trained professionals hired by kings, nobles, and even armies. Falconers trained hawks, falcons, and eagles to hunt for food, or for sport. Their work took years to perfect. A falconer had to understand the mind of the bird, its fears, its flight, its hunger. In the early morning, you might see one walking the frost-covered fields, a hooded falcon resting calmly on his leather-gloved hand. The relationship between bird and man was delicate. Trust was earned, not forced. Training a falcon could take months. Some noble families passed their birds down like heirlooms, living, breathing legacies. A well-trained falcon could snatch rabbits from hundreds of feet in the air or catch a pheasant mid-flight. But the falconer's job wasn't all glory. He had to care for the bird daily, feeding, grooming, and guarding it like treasure. If the bird flew away, or worse, died, the blame often fell on him. Many falconers lived in small cottages on the edge of noble estates, paid well but expected to stay out of sight. Their birds were admired. They were not. Back in the town square, another profession is preparing for the night, not in feathers, but in fire. The link boy was a child, often no older than 10, whose job was to guide wealthy citizens through dark city streets at night using a flaming torch. Before gaslights, walking alone after sunset was dangerous. So, for a small coin, the link boy would walk ahead of you, torch held high, lighting your path, scaring away thieves, or rats. All of these lives, hermits in huts, boys with torches, silent bird whisperers, wove the threads of a world now long gone. Their hands built it. Their feet walked it. Their names, mostly forgotten, until now. As candlelight flickers behind shuttered windows and the last carts roll quietly down muddy lanes, the world begins to sleep. But even in stillness, some must work. And few were as overlooked, or as essential, as the mudlark. Along the banks of the Thames in 18th and 19th century London, at the lowest tides, mudlarks crept barefoot through thick black silt, searching for anything that might sell: nails, coal fragments, bits of rope, scrap iron, or broken clay pipes. Many were children. Some were widows. Most were desperately poor. They carried small sacks and rusty hooks, eyes trained to spot the slightest glint beneath the muck. They worked in silence, often up to their knees in freezing water, dodging rats, sewage, and broken glass. The stench was constant. The risk of illness, cholera, cuts, and fevers, was simply part of the job. And yet, in a single morning, a skilled mudlark might earn enough for a crust of bread or a handful of potatoes. There were no wages, no employer, no safety net. Just the river, and whatever it chose to give. Occasionally, a coin or valuable trinket would surface: an old ring, a dropped silver spoon, a pendant lost in the tide. For a moment, it felt like fortune. But those moments were rare. As dawn painted the river in pale gray, the mudlark vanished again into the city, pockets heavy, eyes down, blending into the crowd as if they had never been there at all. Not far from the riverside, another profession rose just as quietly. The resurrectionist, sometimes called a body snatcher, lived in the shadows between science and superstition. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, medical schools desperately needed human cadavers for dissection. But legally, they could only use executed criminals, and there weren't enough to go around. So, resurrectionists provided the supply. Under cover of night, they entered graveyards with shovels and cloth sacks. They didn't rob graves for jewelry, they were after the body itself. Fresh corpses brought the highest price. They moved quickly, carefully, often leaving no sign a grave had been disturbed. It was dangerous work. Families began guarding fresh graves with armed watches. Some installed iron cages, mort safes, over the coffin. If caught, resurrectionists could be beaten, jailed, or worse. Yet the pay was enough to tempt many. Surgeons, desperate to train the next generation of doctors, paid well and asked few questions. Resurrectionists worked in teams. One to dig. One to watch. One to carry. They didn't speak much. Their world was quiet and cold, filled with risk and secrecy. Some claimed they only took what science needed. Others simply saw it as business. Either way, they helped shape modern medicine, though history rarely thanks them. And as night deepens, one more forgotten voice rises, not with tools or torchlight, but with words. The scribe, once the heartbeat of knowledge, now nearly extinct. Long before printing presses, every book, contract, map, and letter had to be copied by hand. Scribes spent their lives hunched over parchment in candlelit chambers, dipping quills into ink, copying one careful line at a time. They didn't just write, they preserved civilizations. Ancient laws. Religious texts. Entire histories. Their eyes strained under dim light. Their fingers cramped. A single smudge could ruin hours of work. They mixed their own inks, scraped parchment clean with knives, and sometimes drew delicate illustrations in the margins. Most scribes never signed their name. Their work was for kings, bishops, or scholars. They were the quiet hands behind powerful words. And as printing rose, their world faded. But tonight, as we remember them, their words echo again. And so, too, do their stories. As the world slipped into the rhythm of machines and electricity, some professions vanished quietly, like shadows fading at sunrise. But even during the rise of factories and steam, a few ancient trades clung to the edges of society. One such figure, half artist and half magician, was the rat catcher. In 18th and 19th century cities, rats were more than a nuisance. They were a threat, carriers of plague, destroyers of grain, and unwelcome guests in nearly every cellar and alleyway. Enter the rat catcher, a man, or sometimes a boy, armed with traps, smoke, dogs, and more than a little courage. He knew the secret paths between walls. He could read the soft scurry in the dark. Some caught them alive to sell to rat-fighting rings. Others used trained terriers to kill dozens in minutes. The job was dirty and dangerous. Bites were common. Sores, infection, and disease were part of the trade. But to city dwellers, rat catchers were a strange kind of hero. They cleared taverns, bakeries, and homes. Some were even hired by royal households. In London, one famous rat catcher named Jack Black styled himself Royal Rat Catcher to Her Majesty, wearing a top hat and colorful vest as he hunted under floorboards. He also bred rare rats as pets, white, spotted, golden. Some say he helped start the Victorian trend of keeping fancy rats. So even among filth, there was odd prestige. Still, the rat catcher's work was solitary. At night, his lantern flickered near gutters and docks, his terrier sniffing beside him. By morning, he disappeared again, leaving only silence and empty traps behind. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, in smoky corners of print shops, another vanishing profession inked its final words. The typesetter, once the beating heart of the printing world, worked in grids of tiny metal letters, each one arranged by hand, backwards, to create a mirror of the printed page. Before digital publishing, before even typewriters, typesetters laid out every book, newspaper, and pamphlet one line at a time. Each letter had weight. Each space, each period, mattered. A mistake meant tearing it all apart and starting over. Their fingers were always ink-stained. Their eyes scanned hundreds of words an hour. Their backs ached from leaning over cases of lead type. But typesetters held power. They saw every headline before the public. They read private letters, political manifestos, secret love poems. They worked in silence, but their hands helped shape revolutions, spread ideas, and define public opinion. In wartime, they risked their lives printing banned materials. In peace, they labored through the night so a city could wake up to news. They memorized thousands of letter positions by touch alone. Even as machines began to take over, some typesetters clung to the craft, refusing to give up the rhythm of letter by letter, line by line. And while one set the type, another listened closely, ears trained to a world before recordings. The piano tuner, though not forgotten entirely, once lived a life of constant travel. With tuning fork in hand, he walked from manor to school, pub to church, adjusting every string, peg, and hammer by ear. No screen told him the notes were correct. Only muscle memory and years of listening. It could take hours to tune a piano. Each one was different, moody, stubborn. He worked in silence, listening, adjusting, testing, again and again. And when he was done, the music returned. Not his music, but he made it possible. These quiet trades, of noise, of ink, of fur and sound, are the threads of a vanished world. And still, there are more waiting in the wings of history. As the sky dims to a deep velvet blue and oil lamps flicker behind glass, we move once more into the folds of forgotten labor, toward those who toiled in obscurity, their names lost, but their impact hidden in plain sight. In the cold corridors of ancient libraries and religious scriptoria, one profession labored quietly beside the scribe, the illuminator. Unlike the scribe, who copied text, the illuminator brought pages to life with art. These were not casual drawings. Each letter was carefully bordered with gold leaf, each margin filled with delicate vines, mythical beasts, and miniature scenes of saints, kings, and peasants. They worked with ground minerals, lapis lazuli, malachite, cinnabar, to make brilliant blue, vivid green, and deep red pigments. Using brushes no thicker than a strand of hair, they painted by candlelight. A single illuminated page could take days. A book could take years. Many illuminators were monks or nuns. Some were laywomen, working anonymously for wealthy patrons. Their names were rarely recorded, but their artistry endured for centuries. They did not speak while working. Their world was silence and color, devotion and patience. Sometimes they added playful touches, a rabbit in a monk's robe, a cat chasing a snail, a knight battling a giant fish. These hidden jokes, buried in sacred texts, are one of the few places where their personalities still flicker through time. Far from the quiet cloisters, another craft thrived in the din of war and royalty, the work of the court jester. Unlike modern comedians, jesters were more than entertainers. They were advisors, truth-tellers, and licensed fools. In medieval courts, they wore bells and motley coats, but beneath the humor lay sharp minds. A well-placed joke could reveal truths no noble dared say aloud. Jesters memorized lineages, political feuds, and court gossip. They entertained with song, riddles, mimicry, and biting satire. Some were dwarfs or had physical conditions that made them curiosities to nobles, others were scholars who disguised wisdom in wit. A jester could mock a king in public and live to see another day, a rare power in a dangerous world. Yet their lives were fragile. One misjudged joke, one wrong laugh, and they could be cast out or worse. They lived on the edge of favor. Some were beloved, buried with honors. Others vanished from the record the moment they lost their audience. And while jesters entertained the rich, the bellman served the people. A close cousin to the town crier, the bellman walked the night streets, his voice the only sound in the still air. In one hand, he held a lantern. In the other, a bell. He rang it softly as he passed, calling out the hour and any warnings for the night. 2 o'clock, and all is well. His job was part security guard, part announcer, and part comfort to those awake in the dark. He might call out fires, floods, or criminal sightings. In some towns, he carried news from one end of the city to the other after dark. In return, he was paid by the city, or sometimes tipped by grateful households. The bellman knew every alley, every shortcut, every locked gate. His voice became a lullaby to the sleepless. But like so many roles, he faded as gas lamps spread and police forces grew. His last calls were drowned out by engines, telegraphs, and electric clocks. Still, in the quietest hours of night, if you listen closely, you might imagine that soft bell in the distance, reminding you that once, someone walked the dark to keep you safe. As we drift further into the quiet corners of forgotten labor, we come across professions that bridge the world of the living and the unknown. Among them, few were as eerie, or as misunderstood, as the plague doctor. Dressed in long black coats, gloves, and the now iconic beaked mask, the plague doctor moved through the deathly silence of infected cities. The mask's beak was filled with aromatic herbs, believed to ward off bad air, which people once thought caused illness. His wide-brimmed hat marked him as a man of medicine, though few had formal training. He carried a cane, not just for balance, but to examine patients from a distance, to lift bed sheets without touching, or, at times, to keep desperate townspeople at bay. Many plague doctors were volunteers or second-rate physicians hired during outbreaks when no one else would come. They treated the sick, recorded deaths, and sometimes even helped with wills. But their presence was rarely welcomed. Their arrival meant death was near. Children feared them. The sick clutched their rosaries tighter. Still, the plague doctor walked on, his figure gliding like a shadow through the streets. Despite their image today, most did not survive long. The job was seen as a sentence, a last resort for the desperate or the brave. From the darkened homes of plague victims, we turn to the glow of firelight, where the chimney sweep begins his climb. In the 18th and 19th centuries, coal was king, and chimneys were everywhere. But with heat came soot, and someone had to clean it. That someone was often a child. Small boys, sometimes as young as 6, were sold or orphaned into the trade. Their small bodies allowed them to crawl up narrow flues, sometimes no wider than a foot. They carried brushes, scrapers, and cloths, but more often, they used only elbows and knees, skin raw from brick and ash. The work was dangerous. Chimneys were dark, slick with creosote, and sometimes still hot. Children got stuck. Some suffocated. Others fell from rooftops. Accidents were common. But the sweep's job was vital. Without cleaning, chimneys could catch fire or choke a home with smoke. Some master sweeps looked after their apprentices, feeding them well and giving them shelter. Others were cruel, treating children as tools. Laws eventually outlawed child labor in the trade, but not before countless young lives were scarred, both literally and figuratively. In time, the image of the chimney sweep softened, romanticized in songs and stories. But the truth was harsher. It was a life of soot, hunger, and silence. And while some toiled in filth, others shaped beauty into sound. The bell founder was a craftsman of echoes, a master of molten metal and resonance. In dusty foundries, he shaped bronze into bells, for churches, clock towers, ships, and schools. Casting a bell was not simple. It required skill, math, patience, and faith. The bell's shape, thickness, and material determined its voice. A single miscalculation and the bell would ring dull, or worse, crack. Bell founders built massive molds from clay and horsehair, layering them over weeks. They melted copper and tin over roaring fires, pouring the glowing liquid carefully into the mold. Then they waited. Days passed as the bell cooled. When finally released, it was polished, tuned, and struck for the first time, its voice heard by human ears after months of silence. Some bell founders became famous, their work traveling across continents. But most remained anonymous. They stood in workshops filled with soot and silence, listening closely to the one sound that would outlive them. Their bells still ring, long after their names have vanished, just like so many who shaped the world, then disappeared beneath it. With every step deeper into history's forgotten layers, we discover not just labor, but a different rhythm of life. A world shaped by hands we no longer see. Among these was the patient, precise work of the lace maker. Long before machines wove intricate patterns in seconds, lace was crafted entirely by hand, thread by thread, knot by knot. In quiet cottages and sunlit attics, lace makers, most of them women, sat hunched for hours at a time, working with bobbins, pins, and linen thread. Their fingers moved with practiced speed, braiding and twisting fine threads across padded pillows to create designs so delicate, they seemed almost impossible. The patterns were memorized or pinned onto parchment. Mistakes were hard to fix. A single missed twist could ruin an entire piece. Yet these women wove wedding veils, royal collars, and altar cloths, luxuries made slowly, silently, and often in poverty. They were paid by the inch. A few pennies for a foot of work that could take a full day. Their eyesight faded early. Their backs stooped. But still, they worked, sometimes for noble patrons, other times just to keep bread on the table. When machine-made lace appeared in the 19th century, it was cheaper, faster, and nearly as beautiful. Orders for handmade lace dried up. One by one, the workshops closed, and the quiet tapping of bobbins faded from the world. In another forgotten space, this one outside, under open skies, the ice harvester carved his living from winter itself. Before electric refrigeration, ice was a precious commodity. It preserved food, cooled drinks, and filled iceboxes in homes and ships. But someone had to collect it. In the depths of winter, men walked onto frozen lakes and rivers with saws, picks, and long poles. They cut massive blocks of ice, hauling them out of the water with tongs and levers, then dragged them to wooden ice houses where they'd be packed in sawdust and straw. These ice houses could keep the blocks frozen for months, even into summer. From there, ice was shipped around the world, by train, by cart, even across oceans. The work was brutal. One slip meant falling into freezing water. Fingers went numb. Faces burned from wind and frost. But the ice trade was huge. Entire towns depended on it. And for a time, it felt permanent. Then came refrigeration. Silent, effortless cold. The lakes remained, but the harvest ended. Ice houses stood empty. And the men who once wrestled winter into blocks simply faded with the spring thaw. But perhaps no job captured the beauty and fragility of time like that of the clockmaker. In candlelit workshops tucked behind shop fronts, clockmakers bent over brass gears, coiled springs, and delicate glass faces. They worked in near silence, listening to the tick of their craft, each movement measured, each component placed with care. Making a clock wasn't just about function. It was about rhythm. Harmony. A good clock told time. A great one made you feel it. From grand cathedral towers to small pocket watches, clockmakers brought order to a world without alarms, deadlines, or digital reminders. They cut gears by hand. Engraved numbers. Filed teeth until they meshed perfectly. Some clocks took months to complete. Others, like the great astronomical clocks of Europe, took years, combining mechanics with art and astronomy. Their work demanded patience, precision, and peace. They lived by what they built, surrounded by ticking and talking, always aware of the passing hours they tried so hard to tame. And though many of their clocks still stand, few know the names of those who made them, those who measured time, only to be forgotten by it. Time, as the clockmakers knew, moves forward without pause. And with it, the world leaves behind not just tools and techniques, but people. Entire professions, once as common as rain, now exist only in brittle pages and broken memories. Among them was the lamplighter, a figure once as familiar as the sunrise. Before electric light, cities and towns were lit by gas lamps that lined the streets. Each evening, just as twilight began to fall, the lamplighter would step into the dusk with a long pole and a slow rhythm. One by one, he'd walk the same route, reaching up to open the lamp's valve and ignite its soft yellow glow. Some wore leather aprons, others tall hats. In winter, their breath curled like smoke as they moved through snow-covered squares. He wasn't just lighting streets, he was marking the beginning of night. Lovers on walks, shopkeepers closing their doors, children being called home, all knew their day had ended when the lamplighter passed. In the morning, he returned, this time to extinguish the lamps with a metal hook. The job required no great strength, only steadiness and care. But it was vital. In many towns, lamplighters also served as informal watchmen. They noticed broken windows, missing signs, strange shadows. In a way, they were the city's pulse, steady, quiet, always moving. As electricity took over, lamps began to light themselves. One switch could do what once took hours. And the lamplighter, like the flame he carried, slowly flickered out. In another part of town, behind the closed curtains of grand homes and estate houses, worked the cupbearer. Though most common in ancient and medieval courts, the role lingered in noble households for centuries. The cupbearer's duty was simple on the surface: serve the drink. But behind that simplicity lay immense trust. In times of political intrigue and poisonings, the cupbearer was the last line of defense. He poured wine for kings and emperors, often tasting it first to prove it was safe. Some wore fine clothes and stood close to the throne. Others were invisible servants, trained to watch for hesitation, listen for whispers, and guard every goblet like a sword. In some cultures, cupbearers were family members or childhood companions, raised to be both loyal and discreet. They knew the ruler's habits, moods, and fears. A glance could signal danger. A nod could save a life. But when peace settled in and poison faded into history's margins, the cupbearer quietly vanished. His title became symbolic, then decorative, then forgotten altogether. Just as vanished was the groom of the stool, a position so intimate, it defies modern imagination. In royal courts of the Renaissance, this man's job was to assist the monarch in the most private of moments, using the toilet. It wasn't seen as demeaning. In fact, the groom of the stool was often a high-ranking nobleman. His proximity to the king gave him unmatched access, and many became trusted advisors. He helped manage royal hygiene, handled linens, and even recorded the king's digestion, believing health could be tracked through such details. Strange as it sounds now, this job was once coveted. In the rigid structure of royal courts, intimacy equaled influence. The man who stood beside the king in private often had his ear in public. But as plumbing advanced and manners evolved, the position, like so many, became obsolete. The stool remained. The groom did not. And so, one by one, these professions drifted into history, leaving behind no statues or holidays. Only the faint outlines of lives that once lit streets, filled glasses, and wombed the hours of kings. As we follow the thread of forgotten work, we find ourselves now in the bustling world of the sea, where sailors and fishermen have long depended on unsung heroes, like the lamp trimmer. Before electric lights and sealed bulbs, ships were lit by oil lamps. The lamp trimmer's job was to keep these lights burning bright through long nights at sea. Armed with scissors and snuffers, he carefully trimmed the lamp's wick to ensure a steady flame, no more, no less. Too long, and the wick would smoke and blacken the glass. too short, and the lamp would flicker and die. The lamp trimmer worked in cramped, swaying quarters, often in the darkest hours before dawn, maintaining the ship's lifeline to safety. His work was delicate but crucial. A well-maintained lamp meant better visibility on deck, safer navigation, and comfort for the crew. Ships relied on these lights not just for guidance, but as symbols of hope during stormy nights. Meanwhile, back on land, in the quiet corners of bustling towns, lived the knocker-uppers' less-known relatives, the town whistle-blowers. In some cities, before the widespread use of clocks, whistles and horns announced the changing of shifts, curfews, and alarms. Stationed atop tall buildings or towers, these whistle-blowers breathed deep and blew sharp calls into the air. Their sounds cut through fog, smoke, and noise, a human alarm system long before sirens or phones. They alerted townsfolk to fires, floods, or approaching armies. Their calls marked time, work start and end, church bells' absence, or market openings. Though their voices faded as technology advanced, their role as the town's ears and lungs was once vital. Not far away, the rat catcher roamed again, this time with an unexpected companion, the ferret. Ferrets, long trained for hunting rats, were an essential tool in pest control. Rat catchers released their ferrets into dark cellars, barns, and underfloor spaces, where rats hid in droves. The sleek animals chased their prey into nets or traps, helping to clear infestations that spread disease and destroyed food supplies. Training a ferret required patience and skill. The animals had to be fearless yet obedient. They became partners, often living in small baskets or cages carried by their human companions. Rat catching with ferrets was messy, smelly, and dangerous work. Bites, scratches, and infections were common. But the partnership between man and ferret was a silent alliance in the ongoing battle against vermin. And while these roles seem distant now, their echoes survive in the quiet hum of modern cities. Streetlights that turn on automatically, alarm systems that call for help, pest control services, and the gentle glow of lamps, all owe something to those long-gone jobs. As the night deepens and your eyes grow heavy, remember, behind every shadow in history lies a story of hands that built, protected, and cared for a world that once was. As we near the close of this journey through forgotten labor, one profession stands out for its strange combination of science and superstition, the plague watcher. During centuries when deadly diseases swept through towns and villages, plague watchers were appointed to guard infected households. Their job was grim and isolating, to make sure that no one left the sick home, and no one entered without permission. They stood at the threshold, often for days or weeks, armed with long staffs to keep people at bay. They recorded who came and went, marked houses with chalk, and sometimes administered rudimentary care. Their presence was a constant reminder of death and fear. Plague watchers were paid poorly, if at all. Many caught the disease themselves. Their own families sometimes rejected them. They lived on the edges of society, surrounded by sickness and silence. Meanwhile, across the bustling city streets, another forgotten figure performed daily miracles of warmth and comfort, the firewood carrier. Before modern heating, wood was essential fuel. Firewood carriers gathered, chopped, and delivered wood to homes, inns, and bakeries. They carried heavy bundles balanced on their backs or in carts, navigating narrow lanes and crowded markets. Their work was backbreaking and dirty. They faced early mornings and late evenings, cold winters and hot summers. Yet their efforts kept homes warm, ovens baking, and blacksmiths hammering. Firewood carriers were often among the poorest, taking whatever pay they could get. Still, they formed tight communities, sharing tools and stories between deliveries. As the glow of firelight fades in the modern world, the echoes of their footsteps linger in hearths and ovens, silent witnesses to a time when warmth was earned by sweat and muscle. And finally, tucked between the pages of history, lies the humble chalkboard cleaner. Long before digital screens, classrooms were ruled by blackboards. Teachers wrote lessons in white chalk, and someone had to erase them clean for the next day. The chalkboard cleaner's job was simple yet essential, wiping away yesterday's words to prepare for tomorrow's learning. Usually a student or a janitor, the chalkboard cleaner worked quietly at the end of class, dust clouding the air, fingers chalky and dry. It was a thankless task, but one that kept knowledge flowing. Though overlooked, their work reminds us that progress depends not only on those who teach or create, but also on those who clear the way, making space for new ideas to take root. As you drift toward sleep, remember these hands, the unseen, unheard, but never forgotten. For history is built not just by kings and battles, but by the quiet work of many, lost to time but living on in story. As our journey through forgotten professions comes to a close, we find ourselves reflecting on the quiet dignity of those whose work shaped the everyday world but left no lasting fame. One such figure was the knocker-upper, a human alarm clock long before devices beeped and buzzed. In the smoky streets of industrial cities, knocker-uppers rose before dawn. Armed with long sticks, batons, or even pea-shooters, they tapped or knocked on bedroom windows to wake workers for early shifts. Their rhythm was precise, a few gentle knocks, a pause, then another round. Some carried small lamps or whistles to navigate dark alleys. They knew every house, every tenant's schedule. Their work ensured factories ran on time, and families started their days on schedule. Knocker-uppers earned small wages but were respected for their reliability. Yet as alarm clocks became affordable and accurate, their role vanished quietly into history, replaced by silent gadgets. Then there was the mudlark, whom we met earlier by the Thames, but whose story deserves a final note. Mudlarks scavenged the muddy riverbanks for anything valuable, coal, metal, pottery shards, or lost coins. They lived on the edge of society, often children or the elderly, surviving by their wits and patience. Despite the dangers, sharp objects, disease, and harsh weather, they found treasures that others overlooked. Their lives were tough, but they helped keep cities clean in their own grim way, turning filth into livelihood. As machines and technology marched forward, many other professions faded: the night soil men, who emptied chamber pots, the lamplighters, who illuminated dark streets, the sin-eaters, who carried away sins in lonely rituals, the gong farmers, who toiled beneath cities cleaning waste. Each role may seem strange or forgotten now, but they remind us how human societies adapt, how people have always found ways to serve, survive, and support one another. So as you drift into sleep, remember these lost hands and voices, quiet guardians of history's unseen side. They built the roads we walk, cleaned the streets we stroll, and lit the lamps we no longer need. Their stories, though silent for centuries, still echo softly in the rhythm of our lives. Good night.